Thanks for having me. And hey, everyone, thanks so much for joining. So I'm pretty excited to kind of walk you through a couple of slides. And I guess I don't know, is there Q&A at the end, or should we have time for that, or is that mostly just the slides? All right, we'll figure it out. So sounds good. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, I'll just give it like this, I think, so I can see it on the back. So cool. I hope everybody, can see this, but what I want to talk about today is kind of new trends and paradigms that we're working towards to build for the chain agnostic future, right? And when I say sort of chain agnostic or kind of cross chain, what I really mean by this is that, so far we have been focusing on developer architectures and user experiences that are specific to, one particular, chain, right? So your infrastructure is built around it, and your application is kind of a build around it, which is great, and it kind of unlocks a lot of potential for you, so you can host your application in a decentralized way. But we have to move beyond that as an industry, right? And we have to talk about what the world should look like, so we can actually start solving use cases for the end users with better user experiences, and developers can leverage global composition and distribution of these blockchain networks. So today I'll talk a little bit about kind of why cross-chain or chain agnostic is important. I'll talk about when it is actually important for your application, and then I'll talk a little bit about kind of how to build cross-chain applications. If you are not convinced that building in a multi-chain environments is the future, then I think you should go back and think about some analogies, right, with sort of traditional systems and traditional networks that have been built. And the oldest networks that have been built are all around physical exchange of goods, right? So we have often people make analogies between different blockchains as countries or cities of different features and different flavors that have their own communities, and of course kind of interaction and connectivity across all of these different countries is fundamental, is a fundamental unlock mechanisms that can enable global distribution and economies, right? If we think about it today, we take it for granted that everything in the world is pretty much interconnected, right? You can travel by air, you can, take a car and, you can drive from one city to another, you can take a boat cruise and so on and so forth. And there's, of course, internet as well that connects information and allows us to communicate, instantly from one globe to another, from one side of the globe to another, just like we're doing right now. But if you just close your eyes for a second, right, and take a step back, and what would you do if you couldn't have one of these communication methods? I think the reality is that it would be a much more disconnected world with with less kind of a benefit for everybody. So in the same way, I think in blockchain ecosystems, we can't think about isolated countries or cities. We really have to think about what does this interconnected, ecosystem really needs to look like. The unfortunate, side effect of a lot of the multi-chain experiences is that both developers and users are constantly kind of getting tired and fed up with all the complicated experiences they have to interact with, right? So if you're a developer, you have to constantly think about what does my deployment look like? Which chain do I go and take my deployment on? Whether or not I put on Moonbeam or, in general, like on Ethereum, and pay higher gas fees, or I build like on Moonbeam and I pay lower gas fees and I have fast settlement. But I need composability and interaction with all the users from all these other ecosystems, right? So developers constantly going through this trade-offs, and the result is that the users are actually practically suffering, in all this. How do they suffer? They pay actually higher fees because the liquidity is fragmented. And so if you're not familiar, I encourage you to kind of take a look at this article by Stephen McKean, who talks about what is the practical impact of having DeFi working and operating over fragmented liquidity. And the practical impact is that users always end up paying higher fees, right? So whether or not it's in slippage or something else, if liquidity is fragmented, you will always end up accumulating more fees as the user. And the user experience is also not ideal, right? You have multiple versions of assets that are spread across different ecosystems. You have to interact with multiple wallets, and you have to think about how to use one application. How do I pay gas across different chains? And it's a very, very complicated experience for the users. So at the end of the day, what are we really trying to solve? We have to solve for two audiences, at least right now, right? Developers that actually want to solve problems for their users. No matter what, a developer has to provide a consistent environment that has low fees, speed, and has the programming environment that they can operate with to solve the user needs. Right? So that's something we have to be able to provide to the developers. And on top of it, we have to enable these developers to build user experiences that have simplicity at its core. Right? When I say simplicity, we need to be able to allow users to interact with any application, any asset on any ecosystem with one click. Right? We're not there today, but this is the kind of the goal, and this is the future that we have to work towards to continue increasing the ecosystem, to continue inviting more and more users to it. And so if you achieve all these goals, then you really have kind of a nice, kind of combination and symmetry between developers that are, can build platforms, and the platforms can actually solve problems, and users interacting with all of these solutions, and revenue can go back to the developers or kind of the builders behind these protocols. And so this is really what we're trying to accomplish. Now, the next question, now that you're sort of hopefully convinced that it is important to build better experiences and chain agnostic experiences, is you may want to ask, when should I build kind of cross chain, right? Or when should I build my application across multiple environments? And there are many, steps along the development pipeline where it makes sense, and I'll just highlight two of them, right? So two simplest cases you can think of. So first, you want to scale your application, right? So suppose you build originally your application on, on Moonbeam or on any other chain, and you want to think about, how do I bring more liquidity? How do I give access to my application to more users? And how do I have connectivity with all of these other services and blockchain ecosystems that are being developed, right? So scale is number one, and kind of cross-chain connectivity is, of course, an answer to many of these questions. And the second thing that I want to highlight is an ability to build cross-chain allows you to kind of differentiate from day one your application, right? Everybody's fed up with these cross-chain experiences. Everybody's fed up having to interact with multiple wallets. And so if you can build your application with better UX, with better designs, with better liquidity management, by building a cross-chain native architecture, then you can stand out your product right from the crowd, and definitely attract more users to it from the get-go. So those are kind of two high-level buckets to think about as you think about cross-chain. Awesome. So now let me talk a little bit about how to build cross-chain, right? And this is where we're working for the Axelar network that enables you to interact and build these cross-chain native experiences. Very high level, how does the architecture look like? At the very bottom of all of this is kind of the network layer, right? And the beauty of this network layer is that it can interact with many, many different ecosystems. So, close to 30 chains have been connected through the stack so far. Everything from, EVM chains to kind of Cosmos IBC chains, and many other developments are in the progress. But you don't need to know about the network layer so much as a developer that's building an application, because on top of it, what we expose is a very, very simple API that allows you to access all of these network services. Okay, and I'll talk about examples of some of these services and kind of how they work. But on a very high level, the way that you would interact with this is that you would have an application that you can build, on any chain of your choice, and from there you would access what we call as an API that would call a gateway, and you can think of a gateway as a router that sits on the chain itself that can help you route messages to any of the ecosystems and communicate with them. Right. So the gateway, in the same way as like at home, you have a router and you can use that, that router to send packets from your laptop and to communicate with external world. And there's all kinds of kind of a complicated infrastructure that takes those packets and actually delivers them. This is the the service of these gateways. In this case, they're not physical routers, but they're smart contracts that are written on these different blockchains that we connect, and your application can interact with these smart contracts and access or talk to another application on a different chain, make a cross-chain function call, perform a token transfer or anything else you can think of. And kind of gluing all this together, the API and the network layer is what we call as network services. And I'll talk a little bit about them, but they just make interaction with the networking stack, a lot simpler by providing things like gas services, monitoring services, recovery services, and so on and so forth. So I'll talk about those in a few minutes. So at the very core of it, at the networking layer, I'm not going to go too much, but there are kind of four different core components. There is a consensus mechanism itself. So that's what powers the decentralized protocol. It's powered by Tendermint. So it's based on proof of stake. Anybody can delegate, anybody can participate, anyone can send transactions or spin up an archival node. It's an open protocol and it's an open system. Next, we have things like finality gadgets. So those are kind of a specific parameters that are needed to be able to finalize requests from one chain to another, right? So if you are sending messages from, Ethereum to Moonbeam, Ethereum has pretty high, finality rules that you have to wait for, 10 minutes or more. And so we have to account for that delay, right? If you're sending messages from a chain that has instant finality, then, those finality rules are a lot, simpler, and you can just wait for one block confirmation and, and that's it. And then you can, route your messages to other chains because you can assume the transaction is then final. There are various multi-party cryptography libraries that are involved in this that allow sort of the network to access these gateways and write messages into them. And finally, I think the very important piece is the programmability of the network itself. So because it's powered by blockchain technology and kind of consensus mechanism, you can actually do very, very interesting programmable features on the network to enable seamless interoperability, right? So one such feature that I'll talk about in a little bit is called kind of deposit addresses. So the idea is that the network can generate a deposit address on any chain that looks no different than any other account, and you can send a message to this deposit address or a token that will subsequently be routed to the destination contract or the destination recipient without you having to do anything else, right? So you don't have to send those tokens from like MetaMask. You can send it from any dumb wallet or centralized exchange, which by the way, maybe you should kind of move off from centralized exchanges at this point, or at least rely on them less. And so you can do all these things with one click, right? So the network will generate the deposit address. You can take, let's say, USDC or any other asset, just send it from a centralized exchange, and the network will know where it needs to go and be routed underneath it. So you don't have to have access to MetaMask. So that opens up really access to a lot of on and off ramps in an easy and efficient way. So this is one place to kind of get started to look at the network. It's called Axelar Scan. It's an explorer that's built on top of the network because everything is based on a blockchain. Everything is kind of open and traceable. You can see who is interacting with who, what are the networks that get a lot of paths and a lot of flows, and you can trace the activity between them. The network has been live since earlier this year. We've done, close to 1.5 billion in cross-chain volume. Like I said, lots of networks are connected, and many developers are building around the stack. And so the previous, use case that I talked about is this universal asset transfer, right? So the idea is that you can generate this deposit address and be able to send your assets from one chain to another, but you don't have to interact with it from MetaMask, right? So it's a very, very powerful. And similar way, you can use a function like send token to send your tokens, through the gateway from one wallet to another, and that actually can be called from MetaMask. So you have different APIs and different access points you can interact with. And so the final piece that I'll just mention is what we call as a Turing-complete cross-chain communication programming model, right? So, and I think that's actually really, really powerful. That enables a whole generation of new use cases that are not possible, previously. And the basic insight behind this model that I strongly encourage you to think about is that, traditionally we've been talking about the concept of, moving assets around different chains, right? So as a user, you probably know things like bridging, where you go to a third-party bridge, you move your tokens to use an application at the destination, which is great, and it has certain advantages, and it's certainly a feature that will be alive. But beyond that, to enable the seamless interactions of users with different blockchain ecosystems and actually composing and unifying liquidity, you don't have to do that, right? So what you can do is you can directly synchronize your programs with one another by sending like cross-chain contract calls. So if you take in a loan in one asset on one chain, and you want to receive this loan in an asset on a different chain, all you really have to do is you have to lock this asset in one smart contract and then communicate a message to another smart contract on a different chain that will authorize issuance of that loan, right? And I think one of the protocols that hopefully you'll hear today about is like Prime protocol that actually does this functionality on Moonbeam network, which is incredibly powerful, and it allows you to have a better user experiences and a better liquidity management across all of these ecosystems in a much more capital efficient way. So I won't go into the details how this general message passing paradigm works. On the very high level, you have contracts that you can write on the source and destination chain, and you can use the Axelar gateway and the message passing protocol to to send those messages and synchronize them with one another. And so I'll leave it to you to kind of study this and hopefully play with different developer environments that we have. This is how, on the very high level, this kind of cross-chain contract call looks like. You just specify a destination chain, you specify a destination contract that you want to talk to, and you specify the message, right? And the message could be anything from a token transfer, NFT transfer, cross-chain, price feed, Oracle call, whatever else you want. Awesome. And the final thing I'll just mention are all these different cross-chain network services that we're building. So how do you build an experience where a user can pay gas, on the source chain in one transaction, where their transaction has to be executed across multiple chains, right? So things like gas services on top of the network allow you to do that. So you can fold all of your gas fees into one transaction, and then subsequently it would get executed, across different chains. And the monitoring network services allow you to trace what is the status of your transaction, and be able to recover in case of failures around it. Awesome. So I don't have time to go here in this example, but one powerful example, and recently announced a partnership of Axelar and Circle, is something I encourage you to check out. There's a QR code. You can take a look at the article, and you can take a look at what is an example of experience and applications you can build to enable these seamless interactions across different blockchains. So on that, I'll wrap it up, and I'll kind of highly encourage you, for the next wave of adoption, to think about how to build simpler experiences, right? With better connectivity, with better UX, with better liquidity management across blockchain ecosystems. And, I think the infrastructure that's been built in place by, Moonbeam, Axelar, and, many other players in the ecosystem is going to be a key that will allow you to build such simple experiences. So thanks so much. And if you want to check out the Axelar network or learn anything about it, here's a couple more QR codes to get started.